Hi, my name's Sarah and I'm a product owner here at Matillion. And I'm here today to tell you about our new feature called shared pipelines. So what problem are we trying to solve with shared pipelines? Well, we're finding a lot of our customers are building similar logic over and over again across their pipelines. So the first thing that they want to do here is to reduce the effort of copying and pasting and testing logic across the pipelines if it's fundamentally the same. They're also looking for a single source of truth. They want to ensure that common logic is applied consistently across their pipelines and not subject to someone making a change in a project where they shouldn't do. The other benefit is that by organisations providing shared pipelines to their users, the users don't necessarily need to care about the details of what's in that shared pipeline, just what it does for them, so they can pull on that logic without having to maintain it themselves. Some common use cases for shared pipelines are things like audit logging, data masking, perhaps some custom logic which transforms things that are specific to the business needs, potentially error trapping, and as I mentioned earlier, abstraction of some complex logic such as Python to perhaps less code-orientated users. So now I'm going to show you a demo of shared pipelines. So here I've got my project. I've set up a fairly simple pipeline based around a Jira query. So here I've parameterized the Jira query with the parameters you'd expect a user of this pipeline to use. So things like username, API token, URL, and in the SQL query, the Jira table. Now don't worry too much about these validation errors. That's because I'm using variables and I don't have any default values set. That's just an aside, but this pipeline has been tested and is ready to run. What I've also done as part of this shared pipeline is I've included an if component. And this is just some suggestions that we would have to, because you're going to have consumers using these shared pipelines, we might want to do some checks on the data that they're entering to prevent the pipeline running in an unexpected way. So here I'm just checking that they've provided all the variables that I'm expecting. And if they haven't, I'm going to end the pipeline and they'll get that message back. Also, just to demonstrate, I've got a very simple sub-pipeline. This just prints a grid variable, but it's really just to demonstrate the fact that, as with pipelines sort of throughout a project, you can nest them and organize them as you wish. So when we say shared pipelines, we're actually just referring to like an entry point to the project. So it's this root pipeline that you're actually sharing. And on that topic, I will share it now and show you how to do that. So let's say we're happy with this being the pipeline that we want to share. We come up here and we share that pipeline. Now, what we're doing here is we're setting an immutable ID, and that will be the ID that consumers will pick when they're picking which pipeline to run. And the reason we do that is because we don't want any breaking changes. If I, as the producer, want to make changes to the pipeline name, that shouldn't break any pipeline. So we set this immutable ID so that we have a consistent name for people to use. So I'm going to share that. So I now can see that there have been changes to my Git repository with the data that's in Git. And so I'm going to commit that change. And in order to make that available to other users in the project, I now need to push that change and publish that change, which is what I'll do now. So that's now published successfully. So I'll go over now to a different project, and this is a project I've already set up, but because I want to map the variables and show you. But if I was doing this afresh, what I would do is I would pull on the run shared pipeline component, and within here I can pick the shared pipelines that have been shared to the account. So in this case, there's just been one that's been shared to the account. I can also select a version. So here you can see I've got two previous versions which are date time stamped, or I can pick latest. And if I pick latest, if the producer publishes a later version, automatically this will just pick up whatever the latest published version is. So I'm going to leave it on latest, but I'll come back to talking about versioning in a bit. So I'm just going to delete this one and we'll continue setting this one up. So here we have selected our singular shared pipeline and we have picked the pinned it to the latest version that we have selected, but that is pinned. So if I was to publish another one, it will still say on this one that I have published 6 minutes past 3. Now, I will say that what will be coming is the ability to enter a version number. That'll be a few weeks away, but for now it will be date time stamped. And here is where the kind of real business end comes in here. So this is the parameters that I will set in order to run that shared pipeline. So you can see that those variables, and if I just click here, you can see that they populate the drop down, that I can set them to however I need, and also the grid variables as well. So I had one grid variable which I've set some specific values of, and they will be printed out. So now that's all ready to run, I'm going to run that pipeline. And that's been successfully run. So here we can see that I have loaded 100 rows into Jira, and I've also printed the variable inputs that I actually set as part of my run shared pipeline component configuration. Now, one thing just to emphasize here is that where on my shared pipeline I had put values like the API token and I've referenced a variable, what you should see here is my Jira API key. I've set that value to Jira, and that is the name of a secret reference that I've set up in the consuming project. So it all sort of works through it. These don't just behave as literal values. These do pick up those secret references within the parameters. So lastly, I'd just like to take a note on how versioning can be approached with shared pipelines. So the appropriate approach will largely depend on the comfort level and the practices within each organisation, but we've got 2 different ways that we could look at this. The first is that the responsibility of not making breaking changes could be entirely put on the producer. And so in this situation, you'd potentially ask your consumers to pick latest. And as the producer, perhaps you continue to make non-breaking changes in the original pipeline and publish those. But if you need to make a breaking change, you'd potentially then create a copy of the pipelines, perhaps name them as V2, much like an API style of approach, and those would be effectively separate pipelines. An alternate way of looking at it is to put control on the consumer and pin the version. However, I appreciate if you've got lots of run shared pipeline components that are calling the same shared pipeline, you don't want to have to go through and update them separately. So the option you can use here is, here I've created a project variable, and we'll just go and look at this. I've actually just set this to the value of the last version. And of course, you can set a value per environment as well. So what we can do here, if I just update that, is I will change this value to say version, and this will then dynamically look at whatever's in this field. And so you can set your run shared pipelines to work based on that parameter that you can just change in one place. So just to prove that works, I'm going to set that to run. And here we go, that has successfully run. So that is shared pipelines in a nutshell. We hope you find the feature useful, and any feedback that you'd like to give us, we'd love to hear it.